and minor into major at the end. Welcome, friends. It's glad you're here, and we'll jump right in. I think. Thanks for joining me this evening for Sorta Scriptural, kind of an intermediate episode, and try to answer some questions. I had initially considered this taking up a look at the Veridical paradox, basically, which is a notion that appears absurd at the outset, but what ultimately comes into turns out to be true, right? Truth is stranger than fiction, perhaps that. This is something that I think can be applied in some ways to the story that we're told in Scripture of the person of Jesus. And I think I'll start this evening answering a question that I got from LC King Lucas, that you probably know in the chat. And he sent me a Skype message, which unfortunately I didn't see and get to until he had already posted a video regarding the Trinity. And I haven't even seen that because I didn't want to see it until I actually answered the question. Because it's a great question, and I wish that I had answered it prior. The question is brief, and it says, do you believe Jesus was a historical personage? And the reason, it would have taken me a moment to get into it anyway, because it sort of depends on what you mean by that. And I know that probably sounds initially like, well, it depends on what your definition of is. But it's not exactly like that. So again, it sort of depends on what you, because keep in mind that words have meaning, but sometimes people have a different look or they have a different take on what those words may mean. And so here, the historical personage is like, you mean what they teach us now? Because that would be no. But historical as in an actual person? Yes. Yes, I do. And I think there's a pretty good amount of evidence for it, although, again, some of those things have been changed over time. And we certainly know that, grappling has occurred. And then the question occurs, how much grappling has occurred? And how do you know what's right and what's not right? Those are all great questions. And ones that I want to try to tackle this evening, as well as another great one sent in by a listener, Mike, who asked this. And so I don't want to just kind of just jump all over the place, but I do want to put some of these out there because I think they're kind of related, right? So I'll probably try to cover them all at once. Essentially, it works this way. How a person was perfect, a man, and died for our sins. I believe no connection with God would be hell, and it's an essential guide to life without question. But, and this was kind of to me and Wayne, how do you guys know that he has a name and did those things? My understanding is the stories of the Bible pertain to life in every way. I agree with that. All right, so basically this idea, and so here we get this this paradox, right? And this understanding or this idea, right? And it gets put out there into a ridiculous format, right? And you can do this with sort of anything, I think. But you go, okay, so how does a deity have to sacrifice himself to himself, right? How does that work? And sort of, again, all these sort of poking and making it ridiculous. And I suppose many things can sound ridiculous in a way. You could do that with a marriage. You could make a marriage relationship seem ridiculous if you poke at it and present things in a ridiculous sort of way. And so let's take a look at some of these things. I suppose it helps to go back and take a look at, again, sort of touch again on my views of how all this came about. And again, as with most things here's what I'm going to put into it, right, is that these are these are my views based in part on experience, based in part on reading and understanding, based in part probably, I wouldn't know another way to put it other than just direct inspiration, just my relationship with Dad. So I'm not saying that, I have, like special, knowledge other than, just the relationship with it. I suppose I look at it, is it special knowledge only in that you might not get it elsewhere, but it doesn't mean that not everybody could have it, right? You just go, I would say, just go directly to Dad. Just go ask Dad what he has to say. And I think that there's, again, a lot of wisdom, a lot of information there that can be easily had by people if they would just ask, right? So so I don't think it's special as in it's mine and I'm hiding it and I'm going to keep it from you. If you don't, if you don't follow me, that's not how I roll. And so I always will say, go directly to the source and, ask there. and see what you get. And so the possibility exists that I have mistaken what I've seen and heard. That's a possibility, but so far it's enough that I'm comfortable with it, and so we'll just take it from there. With that, again, sort of the story would go basically thusly, right? Back in time, and again, time not as we think of it, because I think that exists outside of time, but eons, unimaginable eons passing, of being the only thing in existence. There was nothingness, and there was only one. And that was Dad. And he was curious and smart and wanted to know and figure out everything, and ultimately, did. During this process, what I perceive is that they split themselves into two, not necessarily opposing, but polarized natures, if you will, to sort of argue the merits of philosophical questions, and balancing the idea of truth and justice with love and compassion, taking the two sides of an argument. In part as a philosophical and intellectual exercise, and in part due to loneliness. And eons and unimaginable time passed, being the only thing that there was. And the loneliness was inescapable and all-enveloping. Until finally, at long last, in nearly desperation, at great risk to its own being, it literally pulled a portion of itself out, literally tore part of itself off to become another being. The first and only begotten Son, the person who we now know as Jesus. Is that the right name? No, we'll get into it. Probably not, right? In fact, almost certainly not. But that person. Ultimately, what we're told in Scripture, and as the story goes, is he's the one who made all of this. Made us in the same way that Dad made him. Like a mini-me. Made us in our image. And therein lies a good deal of the problem. You see, there was these other beings. So once they had made the Son, they knew the secret of how to make life. Thereafter, it wasn't necessary to pull a part of themselves out. They could speak it into being because they understood the nature of it. And so they began creating all kinds of beings with intellect. And I mean, the creativity apparently was off the hook. You got beings with eyes all over it, with wings, beings made of fire, beings made of air, beings made of water, elemental beings. One of these was the pinnacle of creation. And as such, likely involved in the joyous design of making this new place, this mini-me, this mini as above, so below version of eternity. Wrapped inside time, in which a physical, material experience could be had, literally folding dimensions back over on top of themselves to create a bubble inside, in which you could also put a spirit, just like them, into a physical, material flesh body. And it was a fractal, a holographic bit of the main one. of the true one. But it's all interconnected in the same way that all things are interconnected. When he had designed and made all of these things, he paused and made mankind, the mini-me, after his own image and his likeness, and in two parts, male and female, just like the two aspects that Dad had become, Dad and Mom, the spirit and the power, with the ability to come together and join and make life. So instead of pulling it apart, they put it together, right? But the one being this pinnacle of creation with musical instruments built into its body. When mankind was brought to life, and Dad said, bow before him in honor to me because he's just like me, right? So show honor, show respect. He would not. Pride is the first of all sins. And so he said, I will not bow before him. I am better than him. I should have been the master of this world, not him. He knows nothing. He's a child. He's a meat puppet. He's fragile. One wrong slip and he will die. Given another chance, he yet refused. No, I will not bend the knee. This created a problem, you see, because he had defied Dad, whose only desire and whose only intention is love. And when you separate from that source of perfection, when you become imperfect, you are no longer imperfect, or no longer perfect. And so, the ultimate is that you are going to perish. That's the end of it. When presented this, he said, let me ask then a favor. Let me remain until the end of all things. He was granted that, and then immediately turned around and said, I will turn them against you. I will make them hate you. I will take them from you like a jilted lover who wants to hurt the source of his pain. He decided the best way to hurt him was to kill the things that he loved, his children. And it is that enemy whom we have to thank for much of what you see today. For example, he's got these arguments, all right? He's the lawyer. And so he makes these arguments, right? And some of them seem logically sound. If you give us free will and we choose not to obey, and the result is death, is that really then free will? It seems a logical argument. But again, if you disconnect from the source of power and you become powerless, you will die. That's the result of the action, not a punishment. But furthermore, there's this distaste, I think, when people read Scripture and they see the need for sacrifice. Bloodthirsty God demands sacrifice. I don't think it was ever God that demanded the sacrifice. Yeah, I think it was the enemy who demanded that when there was sin, when there was error, when there was those who behaved in imperfection, it was required their death, because that was the verdict given to him, death. And so in order to be fair, in order to keep God's word, they had to die. There had to be a death for the life, right? So the life in being imperfect, it required a death. But just like the story of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, an innocent death could substitute for that life. And so the slaying of an innocent animal as a proxy in the place allowed people to continue So the question Don says, is the offering ever required? Well, I guess there's two answers to that. The one is the offering in terms of what was the sin offering seems to, in the past, have been required to satisfy the enemy. The enemy had bloodlust and demanded that there be death for a life that had gotten twisted, right? When there was a mistake, it required death. And so that death requirement was satisfied by these sacrifices. Later, that was until the person of Jesus, who was then the incarnate Son of God, the one we talked about before, who was literally torn out of the Father, shed his blood, innocent blood, to cover anyone who asked and accepted it. So now is it required? No. Now, does he want an offering? Well, this is the same way, again, people ask, why would a God, it sounds like he's psycho if he demands our worship. I don't think that, my experience with him is there's never a demand for it, but it's an appropriate response. That if you really meet and experience that being, there is only really one response, and that is shock and awe and amazement and worship. Otherwise, you haven't met that being. There's some idea that you have in your head. And this is what we see a lot, right? And I had mentioned yesterday and this morning that part of this stream was sort of inspired by listening to Jaron and Austin Whitsitt talk on the Friday Lounge. And it was a spirited conversation. And both of them, I think, fairly well elucidated a couple of arguments, or if you want to call it that, on both sides of the conversation. I was disappointed. Well, I guess first that, it was a spirited conversation, but I was really disappointed in people more in the chat. Because, again, Jaron presented some arguments that from his position, I understand. I don't agree with them, and I think that the source of the information is probably grabbled. But one of the things that he mentioned, for example, was the story in the Old Testament. And this is a pretty routine thing where people find stories that, by modern sensibilities, seem horrific. And so the story of Jephthah, the Gileadite, is one in which he goes to war, and when he does so, he takes a vow that if God will be with him and help him win, that he will sacrifice the first thing that comes to his door when he gets home. And as it turns out, that's his daughter. And so it becomes this brutal story of human sacrifice. Again, however, it's clear that this is someone who has read a story of a story. They haven't actually read it in context, because if you read it from Judges 11 in context, the story begins where Jephthah was a mighty warrior, but his father was Gilead and his mother was a prostitute. And he was not given inheritance from his family. He was an outcast from his own family because he was the illegitimate son of a prostitute. And so he was cast out of the local village and always on his own. But he was a mighty warrior, and then when and a hunter. And so when the locals got into trouble with the neighboring tribes, they came to him and said, "Fight with us." And he's like, "Screw you. Hey, look at the way you've treated me. Screw you." And they said, "No, we'll if you do this for us, and if we win, we'll make you like the king of the town or whatever. We'll make you the judge. And he said, swear it. And so they swear it. And so he went out and started to fight. Well, it says that the Spirit of God came on him so he could fight these guys off. And there's basically a long story here about he went up to him first and said, hey, what are you attacking us for? He actually went in peace first and said, what do you have against us that you keep coming over here doing it? And they're like, screw you. You guys don't. You're a bunch of weaklings, and they insulted him. And so they went back and decided to fight them, and they did. And then when he felt the Spirit of God on him, he took a vow, and he said what he said, that if you help me win here and thrash them, then I will sacrifice the first thing that comes to my door when I get home. And it turns out it was his daughter. And then there's a whole thing about, she says, okay, let me go up to the mountains and bewail my virginhood. And then when I come back, you can do it. And he says, okay. And she does that. And she never married. And after 2 months, she returned to her father. This is the end of Judges 11. And he did as he had vowed. And she was a virgin, right? And again, so this was sort of incorrectly portrayed. But again, I don't blame Jaron, and this is never about the person, it's just about the content, right? Is that he just got this from reading something else and sort of remembered the story, but it's not about, he kind of couched it as in he's going to destroy some people and take over a bunch of people. It really wasn't like that. I mean, the context is they were being attacked and they asked him to come and help fight the neighboring tribes. But ultimately, what happened is, the very last verse here, from this comes the Israelite tradition that each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of this, and it's taken, essentially, it became a warning, a morality warning tale against taking a rash oath. And this is repeated later in Ecclesiastes, right? So Ecclesiastes 5 basically talks about this and says, be careful what you do when you go to the temple of God. Draw near and listen rather than offer a sacrifice like fools, for they don't realize they're doing wrong. Don't be rash with your mouth or hasty in your heart to bring up a matter before God, for God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore, let your words be few. What Jesus said is, let your yes be yes and your no be no, and that's enough. Any more is sinful. That's what Jesus said about taking vows, right? So the whole thing is a warning tale about taking rash vows. When you make a vow to God, this is again Ecclesiastes 5, when you make a vow to God, do not delay in paying it, for God takes no pleasure in fools. Pay what you vow, but it's better for you not to vow than to vow and not pay it. Don't let your mouth cause you to sin, and don't tell the priest it was a mistake. Why make God angry at you, right? So don't promise something you're not going to give, but don't even make the promise. There's no point. And that was the whole point of Judges 11, right, with Jephthah, is don't take a stupid vow. It was unnecessary. God was already with him, right? But he was a man of his word. He kept his vow because it was with God. He didn't break his vow before God, but it was unnecessary and a perversion of what was needed. And it's clearly said so in Ecclesiastes 5, also the words of Jesus. What I'm saying here is, again, I'm not trying to in any way, bedraggle or diminish Jaron at all. But I'm saying unless you read the entire thing sort of in context, right? And without trying to prove or disprove anything, as people do with science, if you're trying to prove or disprove a certain angle, you're going to find what you're looking for. All of us have confirmation bias, all of us, me included. I can't get away from it. So that's it's simply not going to happen, right? There is a bias that we all bring to it. But here's the thing. When people began to say in chat that Jaron hates God, I'm like, what are you talking about? Right? He just doesn't know him, right? Lots of people hear stories about people that they don't know, and they hear bad stories. And if they're a decent person, well, they're not going to be happy with what they hear that sounds bad. And so I think his response is appropriate to say, that sounds insane to me, because it's presented in a certain way. And if you think about it in a certain way, yes, a decent person would say, yeah, that's a bad thing. On the other side, Austin, right, kind of gets frustrated because he may not be familiar with the story or with the backdrop of it to answer, right? And so then they kind of go scattergun back and forth. And again, this is not about them. If you want to listen to it, listen to it. But here's the thing, is that both of them present sides that are fairly common, right? Is that Austin sort of believes, because in part he grew up, with Southern Baptist background, so he's got that kind of religious viewpoint, and then left it, and then had an experience himself, and so he comes back, and he mentions exactly the same thing that Ceiling Fan Man and I did, right? Which is that when you read Scripture, it often speaks right to you, and you're like, whoa, man, you feel the presence of God. And you try to explain this to somebody, and they're like, so can't you do this with any book? It's 1,700 pages. Anybody could, imagine this, or the conscious mind brings it to you, the law of attraction. And you're like, oh, but no, it's right. So there's those who are unwilling, for example, to look at the nature of the physicality of our world are very unlikely, right, to look into it closely enough to see the nature of what's actually going on. And as a result, they will find it difficult to evaluate or appreciate some of these things. When it comes to the nature of your relationship with Dad, it is so much about experience, right? Most of the people that I see dive into trying to either prove or disprove God, right, do this with a sense of, if I can't prove it, then it doesn't exist. And they come at it as a logical thought process. And so essentially, they sit in the judge's seat to judge and convict the Creator. If I don't approve of his actions, then he must not be a good deity, right? He's a bad person. But think about this for a moment. Look around you. Most of us who have come to question the nature of what we've been told have at least accepted that the world around us definitely appears to be created. I think anyone who, in the absence of having it propagandistically programmed into their mind from a child that you came from dinosaurs and apes over periods of millions of years, if no one told you that over and over and over and insisted that you were stupid if you didn't think so, right, then you would probably not ever come to that conclusion. In the same way that if people didn't tell you it was a spinning ball in the vacuum, you would ever come to that conclusion. You would look around you, and the perception is that it's flat and stationary, and that the objects in the sky move around you. That's your senses. And I think that that would be true for pretty much anybody, that you would look around you and say, it appears to be irreducibly complex, that, for example, how could a male and a female of species develop independently of one another when you have to have generational reproduction at every level in order to continue at all? You can't have multiple generations over which there are genetic changes without having generations, right? And so each system of a body of a living being requires the other systems to be completely and fully in place without any faulty work whatsoever. How could you have trial and error and continue? It just, none of that makes certainly any sense. And there's a lot of other problems with the evolutionary model as it's presented. But again, the idea here being that if you look around, I think we can. It's a pretty easy grasp, unless you're opposed to the idea and unwilling to consider it, that this is a created place. Well, if that is true, and you look around, do you see beauty? Do you look at a waterfall? Who told you it was beautiful? And what? Where did you learn it? Did you read it in a book? Did someone teach you that was beautiful, or did you just say it to your heart? This is beauty. When you look at the amazing amount of life, just how prolific. There are species we still haven't found, millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of species. The creativity required to come up with even one. Right? I look at a piece of architecture, I'm in awe of the artist, and that's a non-living shape. So we have each one with the most incredible designs on orders of magnitude in each living being, and we still can't understand what causes and creates life. What is consciousness? We have no idea. And so when I look at a being who could design and implement that, even one, would be mind-blowing beyond belief. An entire system, an enormous world that all works together. I'm in awe. And so worship, yeah, I have no trouble with that. Fear of God, I have no trouble with that. If you came up upon, the aliens as they present it to us, wouldn't you be afraid? Sure, and that's just an alien species. Well, what about a creator, a literal deity? It's scary. So, fear of the Lord, yeah. Absolute respect, you bet. But when you get to know them, that's the most fascinating part. They're not just powerful, but the very definition of love. And all things good. And all things come through him. So now I'm going to get back to Mike a little bit here, right? So why is there this need then? Why would it be required? Why is there this Jesus thing? What's going on with that? All right, so back to this idea then that once the ball was dropped, whenever, and again, I don't see the forbidden fruit in Genesis. It is often presented as sort of an arbitrary test, right? He put this test there. Here's a box. Don't look in the box. You know the kids are going to look in the box because you told them not to look in the box, and they're curious, right? So when you, but I don't see it like that, right? I see it as it was there because it was a part of the whole thing. It had information in it. It was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It was part of the whole world. And he said, don't touch it, right? Because it will upset things. If you do that, right, you'll die. Right? If you do that, it was a warning. It wasn't an arbitrary test challenge that they were supposed to pass or fail. It wasn't like that. It was a warning. And the enemy, seeing an opportunity, said, hey, come eat it, right? Did he say you would die? You won't die, right? Look, it'll make you smart. It'll give you a limbic system, and you can be the judge. Now, you can determine what's right and wrong. You don't have to wait for Dad. You can just do it yourself. That's what he wants for you. He told you to be smart. He told you to be fruitful and multiply. He told you to get smart. He told you to learn. And this is the fastest way to learn. This is what he wants for you. Well, clearly, he didn't want that. So once we defied God, then the enemy says, they now suffer the same fate as I. I disobeyed, and you sentenced me to death. They disobeyed, you must now sentence them to death, or you are not a fair and just and righteous God. But you see, the thing about it is that God, being outside of time, knows the end from the beginning already. And I want to answer something here that most people still can't get a grip on, because I hear presented all the time about how the sky clock and all these ancient stories of zeitgeist are simply the same story being retold over and over and over, and Jesus is just one of them. There's some truth in that. It is the same story being told over and over and over, but it's all about Jesus, if you want to call him that name. He literally wrote the story of what was going to happen into the sky. The reason the constellations have their names is because it was associated with a story. That there was a conflict between the Creator and one of his creations, one of the powerful creations, that was interfering with mankind. And that ultimately, the Son of the Creator himself would come down to be as one of these beings, to win by dying, to sacrifice himself, and satisfy the need for blood. Because the argument is, blood must be shed when there is rebellion. When there's a disobedience, it requires blood. And so that is satisfied by the blood of the person of Jesus. And all you have to do is say yes. So here's the thing, is it can't you just have love and live a good life and not, hurt anybody? Isn't that good enough? To us, that seems like a fair deal, right? from what I observe, I don't think it works that way. Because already, according to what I understand, right, if from this moment to the end of your days, you were perfect without fail, right? If you were absolutely perfect and made zero mistakes, it still doesn't undo the fact that up until now you have not been. And that ultimately, the statute of limitations doesn't go away. And so there is always this debt to be paid that you cannot pay because you have to pay it with your life. It requires the death of either the person or a substitute. There can be a substitute. And that's why I think Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except by me. So if death is but another form of birth, again, I don't know, right? So here's what I'll always say, is I can't tell you for absolute certainty. I'm telling you the way that I see it, and the way I've come to understand it, and what I'm comfortable with, right? You will have to ask yourself, to Dad, what is true? And when I come to this idea about the nature of Jesus, right, and that there is this Son of God, right? Again, when I look and when I see all of the stories ultimately lead to Jesus. He's not one of many, and all of them are leading back to the sun and the stars. It's the other way around. The sun and the stars reflect its own creator. The creator was Jesus. The creator was the Son of God. All things were created by him and through him, right? And so that it all reflects the story. He told the story already. See, here's the thing, Cybercelli. I don't think we were meant to die. I think in part that's why we're afraid of it. I don't think we were intended to die. That death is unnatural to us. And that is why I think the spirit continues to live, although in a restful or sleepy state, except for those who have been given over to the enemy, who then have a nightmarish state until ultimately all things are decided. Again, this is the way that I see it. So, don't hold me up and say, Baldini said. I mean, again, these are ideas I would hope that you would contemplate and consider. But I always recommend go to Dad. Ask Dad if that's right. And I say the same thing about the person of Jesus. Many people, again, are okay with the idea of a creator. But when it comes to Jesus, they're very uncomfortable with that. My question always at the beginning is, why does that make you so uncomfortable? Why is it such a bad thing that you have the offer of a gift? That you are given the opportunity to not have to pay the price simply by accepting a gift and saying, yes, I'll take that. I'll take your gift instead of mine. And then afterwards, show gratitude. And then do as he says, which was really simply, right? This is the words of Jesus. Love Dad with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. On those two things hang the entire law and the prophets. If you do that, right, you'll be like Dad. And that's been my experience. If you get into a relationship with Dad, and out of gratitude, I have never met anybody who met the Creator who didn't like him. In fact, who didn't love him. There are a lot of people who don't like the stories that they're told about him. They don't like who he's presented as. Just when I was just saying, Jaron, he doesn't like the story he's presented. I appreciate that. I wouldn't like it either. Right? I don't think he hates God. He hates the story that he's been told about somebody he just doesn't know. And there's a huge difference between knowing about and knowing someone. I have found that out absolutely when it came to the Creator, that I thought I knew about him, and I did perhaps know some things about him, but much of that was wrong because it was what I'd been told. Most of what I know about him now is because I have gotten to know him. And that's why I can speak from firsthand experience about who I believe he is, because that's my experience with him, my firsthand relational experience. I can share that with you and say this is what I've experienced, but it's always a little bit different for different people. But I can also talk to people who have an experience with the same person, and we can describe the same person. Yeah, I'll pray that for you as well, Mick. And again, here's the thing, guys, is that and I want to add this too about prayers, that I received a couple of emails also today that I wanted to just say, hey, I got you, right, from Terry, and Terry and Lynn, and there was a couple other folks that I did get emails from, just and I haven't been able to respond yet, but I'll just tell you now if you're listening. Yeah, I'm always happy to join in with prayer for these things. But also keep in mind that, how do I put this? We don't always get the things that we think we want, the things that, well, my experience is that the things that I thought I wanted weren't always the things that were best for me. Now, again, I don't know your situation, so I know that if I had a 4-year-old daughter, I would absolutely want her to be to be with me. There's no question. I can't begrudge that in any way. But I am saying that if you trust Dad, here's what I know. I know Dad is good. My experience is he is exclusively good. There is no other behavior he has besides love. If you go back to the Old Testament and go, I don't know how this kill everybody in this town could be love. Again, I go, look, we don't know all the information. We don't have all the data, right? And so let's say you met a woman, right? And somebody whispers to you, oh, she killed her husband. Well, I think your initial reaction to that would be, oh, it's a bad person. She killed her husband. Would it change your view if you found out that her husband had been abusing her, beating her, raping her, and molesting the kids for years, and she'd finally had enough and beat him to death with a cast iron skillet? Now you might have a difference of opinion because you have more information about the context. So when it comes to, oh, he's murderous and he kills every living being in this town, how do you, again, know that they didn't have Kuru or something that would have ultimately infected and caused all of humanity to suffer? That it was an act of love to put them down. What I can say is that I may not know all the answers, but what I do know is that Dad is good and I can trust him. And that's why I can say, without question, that I trust him with my life. And even though he slay me, I will trust him. Because I know them to be good. But see, I can't convince anybody about that. All I have to say is you have to get to know him yourself, right? And I just say the way to do that is to ask with an open heart, and say, I want to get to know you. If you come with a chip on your shoulder and go, prove to me that you exist, and I don't believe you, prove it to me. I don't know. I mean, I can't say what he's going to do. I've seen, we have stories, right, of him coming to Paul, who was Saul, who was persecuting and killing Christians, and he got up in his face and said, hey, what are you doing? So, I can't say what actually he would do, but my experience is that typically it is those who have a contrite spirit and who go looking. And I had an experience this week that better helped me see it. It's just more of a little visualization. Over the years, I spent a number of years doing mixing records, that sort of stuff, and learning to use my hearing really well. And so, as is the case with most control rooms in better studios, the room is designed such that the sound is perfectly diffused. It's a great mixing space is what you're looking for. But I can close my eyes, for example, and I can tell right away when somebody is there, even without being able to perceive them in any other way, with hearing or anything, or visual or any other way. I can tell exactly their size and shape and usually gender. I can tell if they're moving because they take up an acoustic hole. They take up space, and I can tell that space is being taken up, and so I know that somebody's there. Well, in a very similar way to the process of, I say, abduction, right? You can look around you, I think, and perceive the nature of the Creator. See, many things I can tell, they become very apparent by their glaring absence, things that ought to be there when they're not. Often I can tell when people are lying, right, by what is not included in the story, things that ought to be there that are not. And similarly, when I look around, I can see when I'm quiet. I can perceive the fingerprint of the Creator, that all life represents Him. The nature of everything around us is representative. We're often, we often quote Psalms 19:1 because it talks about a firmament. But think about what it actually says. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament displays His handiwork. It's back to my idea that the heavens, the stars, the luminaries, the sky clock tells the story of the person of Jesus, and whatever His name actually is. Scripture says that we don't even know what it is, right? So is Jesus it? Well, no, because Jesus isn't. J is a new letter, right? They would never have said Jesus. It would have been Yeshua, if that was his name. Again, I don't even know. But I could call him Fred, and he could call me Bob or Steve. It wouldn't matter. We know each other, and that's the thing, right? Is it my experience is not a belief system. It's not a religion. It's not that I choose to believe because somebody told me the story. It's that I know a person, an actual being. That makes an enormous difference. And so I don't have to pore over the Bible to tell me how to behave, right? And I don't have to twist Scripture to comply with my beliefs and to justify my behavior. I can go straight to Dad, and I don't have to worry about whether a particular scripture has been grappled or not. Did it get changed through the Mandela effect? Did the Jesuits change it with the with the Benedictine monks over time and trying to mislead me? I can't, because I know Dad. And so that's why I don't have to worry. The question then comes, and this is, again, one that Jaron elucidated well yesterday, which is, if there are parts that are grappled, how do you know you can trust any of it? And so I have heard this a lot, too, that the Bible is a book written by men to control others. But if you read it, that doesn't make any sense. How can loving others and sacrificing yourself and being a good person be a way to control people? And moreover, there are so few people who actually do it. That would be a shitty way to try to control people when less than 1% actually do it. It's not a very good control mechanism. But what you would do, if you're going to grapple it, if I wanted to grapple it, if I had the truth in one book, I'd just change a little bit of it and then come back and say, see, that part doesn't compare to the other part, and so you can't trust it. And so they'll throw all of it out. The more that I could keep it unchanged and still get people to throw it away, well, then you have people throwing away the most amount of truth. That makes more sense to me, and that's what I observe. There are places that seem off. And much of the Old Testament, for example, what I observe is that, again, people had a very intense experience with the supernatural, and they did the best they could to describe what they understood based on their belief and their experience. But let me ask you something. If I tell my 5-year-old child for me it'd be a grandchild, to clean their room, right? And I insist that they clean their room or they can't go out and play. Have you ever heard this from kids? Why do you hate me? Why do you make me clean my room? You don't want me to have fun. You hate me. So, If that 5-year-old child were to write a story of that interaction with the parent that wanted them to clean their room, what would they say? They gave me a task and they were displeased, so they smote me. Did the parent hate them? Were they a bad parent? No. The child was a child. Didn't understand the context. They didn't understand that the parent loved them and was trying to get them to grow up and be mature. I see the very same thing in especially the Old Testament, that they were trying to interpret the best they could the intentions of the Creator. In some cases without really knowing him, other than as a very scary being, a being of power, and so they're like, "Ooh, scary, okay," right? And they saw things within that context of that worldview. So it doesn't mean they were lying, it just means that they were, perhaps mistaken, and I don't see it necessarily as a means of control. Now, have people used religion for control? Oh, for fuck's sake, absolutely. Consistently. But every religion does that, and that would be whether it was a Baal religion, right, or whether it was any religion that puts somebody at the top and tells you that they're controlling you. That is control. And that's the last thing that I see Dad do, is control. What he asks for is relationship. Get to know me. And when you do, your response is love, is worship. Your response is fear and awe. He doesn't demand those things. But when he asks for them, I think it's logical to say, if you knew me, right, to know me is to love me. If you knew me, this is the way you would behave. And that's exactly what I saw the Ten Commandments being from the first time I saw them, is this is a list of what you would be like if you behaved right. Right? It's not, here's a list of things you must do to make me happy, right? So if like you get married, here's a list of 10 things that good husbands do. Well, they say nice thing to their wife, and they, get them a present they remember the birthday, and they remember the anniversaries, and they, do this stuff. So you can go down and check that list off, and give them a gift on their birthday. Don't forget the anniversary, but still be an asshole. Do they love them? No, they're just checking off a list. So, it is, as I say frequently, right, biggest obstacle to Christianity are Christians. When I talk to somebody like a ceiling fan man who spent most of his life not having any involvement with it, I'm like, oh, great, you have less to unlearn. Right? So much less to unlearn, because it is so difficult to let go of beliefs. Whatever those beliefs are, whether those are beliefs in something or against something. It's very difficult to change your mind with, if you've already made up your mind. I think it does require a sense of humility. Just like, again, most of us here who have come to that we were misled when it came to the nature of the world and the nature of history, the nature of who we are. We've all come to accept that. I think it would be profitable for everyone to consider the possibility that they've been mistaken about the nature of their Creator, that they have been lied to about that as well, about who He and they are. And the best way to understand it is not to try to cognitively, intellectually figure it out, Because by my even trying to imagine who he is, I limit him. He's limited to the extent of my imagination. And I can say from personal experience, one of the most mind-blowing things about him is how huge they are and beyond imagination. So, if you want to know who Dad is, get to know him. Don't rely on stories, especially stories that you think are wrong or bad or intended to mislead people. Just go ask. It's there, waiting. I love Ceiling Fan Man said what exactly we had said within a conversation, right? As if you've got a being who has everything. They made everything. There's nothing you can give them, right? Except your attention, your love, your companionship. They did all of this, just to be in relationship with you. And so why does evil continue to exist and persist in the world? Why did he not just end it? Well, because the argument had been made that he's not fair. And that if you disobey or choose to rebel, then you're going to get killed. And that's unfair. It's against the nature of free will. He has to let it run to its end to prove without a doubt, for all time, forever, that separation from perfection is imperfection and ultimately evil and death. That he is so perfect that anything other than him is bad. I know that may be a mind blower, but when it's perfect, anything other than that is not perfect, and therefore is corrupt. The only perfection is the Creator. And so the only way to truly understand is in the context of the relationship with the Creator. And then again, here comes this argument again. Well, if I choose not to, and I'm going to do this on my own, right? And I choose to figure it out myself. I'm going to use alchemy. I'm going to figure it out. Right? Again, my observation is with this, again, the Creator and what He's done. He's also, I think as any parent would be, he's proud of his son and what he managed to accomplish, that he risked himself completely to literally lower himself. And imagine you wrote a software, you wrote a SimCity, and they're just like you, and then they mess up. And then you could just reboot it, but you decide that you really care about the characters so much that you're going to literally irreversibly become a player in the game and go inside it to fix things. Those who would reject that gift, I can understand Dad being a little frustrated with, that they did not acknowledge the gift. And it doesn't really matter, ultimately, what you think, and I hate to put it that way, but we don't make the rules here. The thing has already been done. The world is on a limited time, and it's coming apparently to the end at some point, whether now or whether sometime in the future. It says that it's on a limited lifespan. At the end, he's going to remake it. When he does, only those who are in his presence will continue to exist. The rest will simply be non-existent. The only way that you can be with him and even survive his glory is to be in relationship with him. If you choose to do it on your own, you'll just go away. And I suppose that's okay. Most people who subscribe to an agnostic or atheistic point of view, believe that when they die, they just go away. There's probably some truth to that, except for the realization, I think, before that happens of what you missed. And what the truth of the matter is that there is a creator. They did create you out of love. And out of foolhardy pride, you rejected every attempt to set you free. So I hope that I have successfully elucidated and addressed some of these things. Again, it may not be the right answer. I don't claim that I have all the answers, only that I have experience and I have studied. I'm always willing to learn more. I'm always willing to hear other people's point of views. I'm not interested in arguing or defending or converting or convincing, debating. It indicates that one person thinks that they're right and there's going to be a winner. And I don't, this is not about winning an argument to me. I have a relationship and I can try to describe the relationship and tell you that the relationship is available to you too. Because I think I've learned to understand the motives of Dad well enough to see why he does much of what he does, and in terms of backing up and being quiet. Because early on, he was very apparent, and people thumbed their nose at him anyway. And much like the story of the wealthy prince who wants to find a wife but doesn't want her to love him simply, or want him simply because he's a prince and has money, he pretends to be a pauper in order to test her character. I think this is very much what we see here in terms of the world. Is that he has made himself very quiet, where it does require someone who will sit quietly and contemplate the nature of what's around them to say, hey, what is going on here? I think it is in the heart of every man to wonder about the nature of who we are, our place in the world, how it came to be, who we are, and where we go from here. I think that is what is put into our heart. And the answers to it come by following the clues. And he wants those who have the temerity and the discipline to follow those clues rather than just being, someone that you wouldn't want to invite to a party. Because there are those people, right? We see them out there more and more. But also more and more I see those who are in our group are quite the opposite. Those who want to know the answers and are willing to accept that they may have been mistaken about things, and willing to study and observe. And so again, I always offer, if you want to know, ask Dad. If you come to me, I will simply point you in that direction. Say, go there. So I cannot fool you. I cannot mislead you. I can only point you to the source. And with that, I thank you for being here. Again, I hope that I have covered these things to your satisfaction, or at least in a way that you could come to understand. Again, I never claim to be the sole arbiter of truth or the authority. Simply offering my observations and what I've come to understand, and describing as best I am able the relationship with my Creator, whom I love dearly. I will now leave you with, again, one of the old songs. This goes way back to, I think, 1996, and this is one of the last ones that Joe and I wrote together. I think appropriate to this episode called Q&A. And as you listen to this, if you stick around long enough to listen to the words, I think you'll perhaps understand the meaning behind it. It was kind of ripped out of a page of my diary. I was very surprised I actually put that in the public eye. We did it in about 45 minutes in Jim's apartment in Arlington, Texas. And with that, again, I hope to see you back on Tuesday and Thursday on Rose 777 channel with the Poppycock Report. And I'll be back next weekend, again, for probably short episodes of Unintended Consequences. They will probably remain short at least to the end of this month and the end of the year, as I try to establish what's going to happen in the coming months, as I try to expand the channel and decrease a bit what I do at the main income source. So we'll see what happens there. With that, again, thanks guys so much for spending time with me this evening and this weekend. And I hope to see you again next week as well. Questions you ask, are you still my friend? You should know after all that has passed, I am here to the end. And yes, it makes me feel like a fool, knowing I haven't come through for you. No, it's not the same when you call out my name. You've given me to tell of my dreams. And yes, I think that I'll be okay once I let go and you have your way. And no, I'm not afraid, I just don't know what to say. Can't believe the time that has passed, and it's getting near dark. You should be almost home by now, but you're here in my heart. And yes, it makes me feel like a fool, knowing I haven't come through for you. And no, it's not the same, but I'll still call